We are both interns at Washtenaw Area Council for Children. WACC's mission is to promote child safety and well-being and to prevent child maltreatment, abuse, and neglect through educational services and programs to children, parents, community members, and youth-serving professionals throughout Washtenaw County.
WACC consists of a few different programs. We do safe sleep, safe baby, wellness and resilience, cyber safety, body safety and training, and stewards of children.
You are joining us today for the Rising from the Dust, Standing with Resilience, More Than Mental Health Luncheon Lecture. We thank you all for taking the time to be here.
To receive CEUs or sketch credits, you must sign in, participate, and then sign out. We will have an evaluation that's provided at the end of the lecture, and we ask that you fill that out for the sketch and CEUs as well, and to help us plan future lectures. If at any time anyone has any questions, you can throw them in the chat. And if you haven't already done so, we ask that you just put your name in the chat to sign in.
I'm now going to introduce our first speaker, who is Carly Lee. Carly Lee serves as a behavioral health specialist within Washtenaw Intermediate School District. Carly provides programmatic and individual and family support and interventions for the Great Start readiness programs, Head Start and Early Head Start programs, as well as crisis response and case management for select K-12 districts. Her work includes, but is not limited to, supporting developmental screenings, classroom observations, coaching staff, and the implementation of school and emotional strategies, individual child therapeutic intervention, parent and staff professional development, and collaboration with community agencies. Additionally, Carly is a certified trauma and resilience trainer through the STAR Commonwealth's National Institute for Trauma and Loss.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to WACC for inviting me to this lunch and learning series. Also want to say thank you to the participants for being here today and giving time for all of us to focus in on this work we're all so passionate about. So I typically have a slide where I'm introducing myself and a picture of my kiddos, and this is 30 minutes, so I didn't put one in, but I am, as I begin, a sister, a daughter, a wife, a mother of 4 kiddos, aged 11, 9, 7, and 5, and just really fiercely passionate about work with children and families. So can you all see my screen? Building resiliency, understanding stress and trauma. I'm going to be building my resiliency with you because I said to some of my co-hosts that I'm really trying to work on this 2-screen thing. So if something goes awry, I may have to like shift back to my 1 screen, but I'm going to go for it. So let's see. One thing that's going awry in the moment is, let me get my...
Is it advancing?
It's not advancing.
You might have to unshare and reshare.
Okay, stop share. There. I'm gonna reshare.
Just in case anybody isn't aware, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. Just in case, want to throw that in there.
Not working so much. So here's what I'm just gonna do. Oh, I'm not going to leave the meeting. Just going to pull it up on my 1 screen. I'm sorry for those that said it was going to be. Okay, do you see it?
Not yet. You're not sharing your screen yet.
Too many things going on now.
Just so everyone knows, we're going to be putting some announcements in the chat too. So if anybody wants to look over those while we're figuring this out.
How about now?
There it is. Thanks, Carly.
There we go. Okay. So let's move you guys over. Building resiliency, as I'm demonstrating on the fly. Okay. So today what we're going to look at is we're going to look at really some of the like brain science and brain research and how that goes along with relationships. I always really want to start, especially with this audience, by saying that I genuinely don't believe that we are speaking to much that's different from some of our pioneers of early childhood. Some of our early childhood researchers are Piaget, Vygotsky, Bowlby and Ainsworth. But I think what's so fascinating about where we are right now is that the science now has sort of, I like to say, caught up with our early childhood researchers. We sort of have now, brain imaging and different sort of ways in which we can truly put some science behind what these researchers have been saying for years. That comes into play when we're looking at the brain-body response to stress and the impact of toxic stress on our brain, our body, and how that is in play with relationships. We'll look at sort of some ways in which we can define trauma and then really speak to resiliency. So I'm going to ask if you will all sort of play along with me in this presentation. It's one of my favorite things to do by Dr. Dan Siegel. He is a psychiatrist and just a fabulous one at that, in that he began medical school and sort of had to drop out for a bit and come back because he just couldn't understand why people were doing medicine without considering relationships. So that's one of my ways of really connecting to this work that Dan Siegel does. So if you can all just sort of play along, and throughout this presentation, I'm going to use this a lot. So we're going to put our hand up here. And to begin, we're going to get ourselves into what we would consider the complete brain state model. So to do that, you're going to put your thumb in the middle of your hand and then bend your fingers sort of over your hand there. And we're doing that because we're trying to show this complete brain model by using our hand. Now, Dr. Dan Siegel tries to not call it his handy model, but it is kind of a way to remember it in that dad joke kind of a way. So we have this sort of handy model here with us, and we are kind of looking at this top part of the brain here as what will be called the cortex. And then if you can lift your fingers up, we're looking in here at what is considered our limbic area, which in a proper sort of model of the brain would be two thumbs, the amygdala and the hippocampus, but it's easier to use one thumb because we don't have two thumbs on one hand. And then we're going to look at this palm here as truly this brain stem. This is where we are going to have our brain stem. And this hand model, we can take a pause for a moment, is super useful because the research is now stating that if we can understand the parts of the brain and really become self-aware of these parts of our brain, and we can work through practices like mindfulness, being reflective, the wheel of awareness, that we can really learn to direct our attention and get certain parts of our brains activated and working together. That is pretty cool because it literally can mean that we can be responsible for changing our own function structures of our brain, which I think is just my kids don't think that emoji is cool anymore, but it kind of makes me think of that emoji. This work of getting this brain to sort of work in a complete model, the parts working together, is truly referred to scientifically as integration. And integration is super cool because it's the best predictor of well-being. It truly is what is going to get us in a space to be in harmony with ourselves and with other individuals. So if we look at this brain model, what we're going to look at here is, again, I'm going to have you sort of open your hand back up, and we're going to look at this part here as truly our spinal cord. And this is one of the regions that connects the brain to the body through the spinal cord. We're looking at this palm, and I'm tapping it on purpose. I really believe in a sensory learning experience. This truly is our oldest part of the brain. 300 million years old. They refer to it as the reptilian brain. It is literally keeping us alive. This is our way we survive, because this is really regulating our breathing, it's regulating our heart functions, our heart rate, and digestion, right? So we're keeping ourselves alive in here. It also is a super important part because it regulates our fight, flight, or freeze response. I actually just recently heard it referred to as fight, flight, faint. So it's this FFF sort of response area, and it's what gets activated when we feel threatened. It's an important part of keeping us alive so that we can recognize what is dangerous for us. So then we introduce in our thumb, which remember it was 2 thumbs, but this is that limbic part of the brain, and this is 200 million years old. So we had this reptilian brain, and then we evolved to the mammalian brain, mammals. So now we have this sort of mammalian brain with this amygdala and this hippocampus working with this reptilian brain. And what we know is that the amygdala is very specialized in input and processing of emotion. We're getting our emotion now into our brain. Kept ourselves alive, breathing, heart beating. Now we get some emotion, and the hippocampus is going to start making memories. So what I like to explain to people at this point is I think of the brain as a prediction machine. It's making little mini models of the world all the time and storing memories and kind of getting to that space of being like, oh, I remember that sort of scenario happened to me before, and this is how I did it. Oh, I remember that. Which, as a big pause, is why this pandemic is so extremely devastating for so many people, is we don't have any mini models of how to be in a elongated state of arousal with ways that we've sort of dealt with it before. So that's why this prediction machine, this brain, is so important. So we get this in here. And what's also really cool about this area, this thumb, is that this is where we truly are mediating attachment. Why? Why are we mediating attachment? This is the mammalian brain. We're mammals now. We need caregivers. We need co-regulation. So from a very young age, we need someone to help protect us and soothe us. So we really need that, yes, we're surviving, our heart's beating, we're breathing, then a threat comes in, and we need this part of the brain, the mammalian part, to sort of help make sense of it. We need to know, right? Like what to do, how to appraise the situation. Then if you wrap this part around again here, we have this cortex. And this kind of on the side, I like to point out, we have part of the cortex in here is the occipital. So that's how our eyes are kind of mapping out the world for us. We have the temporal lobe, our ears are sort of hearing the world for us. And then really this part I love to talk about is the prefrontal cortex. And we really know that in this prefrontal cortex, we are creating those executive functionings that we talk about sometimes. Executive functionings. We are humans. We have this amazing space to have perspective, judgment, problem solving. If you go back to the reptilian brain and you think about a rabbit and a fox, the rabbit sees the fox and it runs. The rabbit doesn't stop for a minute, think about the emotional state, like, wow, I feel a little scared, and then go up to the executive functioning and say, what happened last time when I saw that fox? Did it eat me? I'm wondering. It doesn't do that. The rabbit runs. So that's what's really unique about our brain. And what's really cool is when we talked about this in the beginning, this complete state of integration, it truly means that if we can get ourselves integrated, contribute, and be responsible for that integration, then we are going to stay in harmony. If we are not in that space, Dan Siegel says, you flip your lid, whoop, which I love. I do this with my own children, just so you know. They are very schooled in, I think I flipped my lid, to their siblings. And it's talking about that state now of not being integrated and being in chaos, outbursts, rigidity, withdrawn. Another person that talks a lot about this brain model is Becky Bailey from Conscious Discipline. So she sort of goes through this model and calls this PALM, this sort of unconscious reactive state where you ask yourself this big question, am I safe? Am I safe? Becky Bailey goes into this limbic area and says, am I loved? And she talks about that being unconscious, but also how important that conditioning is. And that's where those relationships come in. Those relationships, that mammalian brain comes in to say, am I safe? And where's that baby looking? You even think about the very, very, very beginning of childhood, right? You have this little baby. We don't put the baby up on the shelf because we know if we just put the baby up on the shelf, the baby's not going to survive without an adult, a caregiver. It needs to be fed. So we say, I'm conditioning some responses as a baby. And then the prefrontal cortex, again, this is why it is a handy model, is this executive functioning and where we're saying to ourselves, what can I learn? So we know that this typical stress response begins in the brain. When a person, when a person gets the fight or flight activated, we are feeling threatened. We have a perceived threat. Now, what's super helpful to know about this process is that how we react to this threat is determined by earlier relationships. So let's think about this. Stress regulation is learned in the relationship at birth. Children with positive early relationships typically can regulate the stress response. I like to say that these are the kiddos that have a crazy about you person. Every day, someone's crazy about that kid. The memories that get formed then in the brain, remember, here's our survival brain. The memories coming in at this amygdala are saying, someone showed up for me. Someone showed up again. You can almost imagine in the early years, a child thinking that, and they're here again. The excitement of that gets stored in the brain. So my example here is that little small human, hungry, tired. So what do? They activate the stress response. They scream, they cry. Their heart rate's going really fast. Fight, flight, fight is activated. They're trying to figure out, am I gonna stay alive? Is someone gonna feed me? And then this co-regulation, this early relationship comes in, soothes, calms the brainstem, appraises the situation in co-regulation and says, you are okay. You can slow your heart rate back down again. You can deepen your breathing. We are going to move you into a state of digestion and you're going to be okay. And all of this then, as the hippocampus comes in, says, I got that. I'm going to store that memory now. I'm here. I'm going to start to wire us. I'm going to start to integrate us. And this is beginning at birth, this co-regulation. I kind of always think of it as that you got the little, now this is where the two hands come in. I always kind of think of it as you got just little baby brain over here and this adult caregiver coming and giving it a hug. Baby brain, hug. Baby brain, hug. Because it's really this co-regulation. I'm sort of giving you my executive functioning. I can pause here too, just to see, is there any questions in the chat that relates to any of this before I feel like I'm in a space of just talking?
I haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat, but please do throw questions into the chat because I am monitoring. So feel free to do that.
That's great. I know that this is 30 minutes, so it's not a lot of time for me to spread out, but I also don't want to just be talking at and over the questions. So I love these little images here of talking about how we can identify stress. So we have this sort of little toddler and we see the green space of being positive stress. And so if we're looking at sort of what those characteristics are in our little crawling toddler, it's telling us that this is brief increases in heart rate. It's mild elevation in that stress hormones really, but we talk a lot about cortisol. And so it's preparing the brain for what it may encounter as a stressful situation later in life. And it needs to be motivated and activated to keep ourselves safe. Some of those situations, meeting new people, I really try to also think out in this space too for all of us, like what this means with where we are with our stress, even like, for example, during a pandemic. We move into what we have this yellow tolerable space. So this is a serious temporary stress, but it can be buffered. For young children, it's really buffered by that sort of crazy about you person, the hugging person. As we go on throughout our lifespan, though, relationships are still important for that. It's really important still to have those relationships, because if we have our lid flipped and we're not using this part of our brain, where are we going to look to? Who are we going to look to? Who are these people that we've chosen to look to? Because what we need to know is that if we don't have that perspective, reasoning, being rational, having judgment, then we're going to keep ourselves here. And we're going to keep our heart rate high, and we're going to keep our cortisol levels high, and we are maybe going to be shorter in breath. And that's not good for our overall health. That's not living in harmony. That's where I think this pandemic is really challenging so many of us. We needed that fight or flight. We needed to be motivated to take action. This is a big deal. So we got ourselves all revved up, and now we're sort of sitting in this space like this is serious. It's a big deal. So you see on that other one, it's saying like maybe a death in the family. And they're sort of saying like, yeah, maybe even something like a pandemic, because our hope is that like we sort of will find a strategy, or we will solve the problem, but this is a really elongated state of having to stay in what is tolerable stress. And we don't have, like I said, that. And so I kind of remind us, that's why people bought a lot of toilet paper, because when we feel out of control, we need to get control back. And one way we got that early on was like toilet paper. Makes a lot of sense. So if we move into toxic stress, that's really where we're saying this is prolonged and nobody's coming in with the hug. We don't have, for young children, it's that co-regulation, that supportive adult that's going to buffer that. And then these stress hormones are so elevated that it can actually lead to damaging some of these developing structures in the brain. And so what I said earlier, what we'll look at is, what is this trauma as we're going to define it? And trauma really is this emotional, psychological, physiological. And I like this definition because I kind of like that word residue, like this sort of muck that's left over from staying with so much toxic stress, that elongated state. It can, I need to sort of always, I like definitions where we're talking about the emotion, like we're feeling hopeless, helpless, powerless, and you're stuck fearing for your safety. You've looked around, nobody's there. And the other thing that's really, really important is this idea of feeling that this experience can be real or perceived, meaning two people can be in the same room with the same event and have very different reactions. Why? Because I got two brains here of two different humans. It could be that someone got the hug early in life and someone else didn't. Or maybe neither one got it earlier in life, but this one found it and is working towards it. There's so many reasons, but to really understand that a traumatic event for a person is so individual and it can be real or perceived. So if we look at trauma in the brain, we know that the area of the brain that becomes the most developed is the one that's the most frequently activated. It's like kind of muscles in our body. If we use them, they get stronger. If we don't, they atrophy. So with children living with trauma, individuals living with trauma, operating from the survival brain, if we know that this is over functioning, we know that it's not wiring. It's not wiring to the top part of that brain. It's not wiring to that prefrontal cortex over and over again. And so what ends up happening? It's underused. We're underusing this part of the body. It would be like just not using, the muscles in one of your arms. behaviors start to really escalate there, right? Because this is where we're sort of trying to bring context, perspective. Is this really the worst thing ever? Well, I'm not asking myself that. So yep, it is the worst thing ever. And we're really impulsive, reactive. And this is where I said that the science is finally here to show us what the early childhood researchers have been saying. We now can look at a brain of somebody that's had a lack of buffering relationships. I know it just says the word neglect in this photo, but I really like to emphasize that it's not just this form of trauma through neglect and abuse. It's lacking those relationships, that buffering, that hug, that co-regulation, all of that nobody showed up, where I'm trying to make this memory and I'm trying to process emotion and I'm terrified. I have no history of someone helping me say, you're okay. You can lower your heart rate. You can take a deep breath with me. So I'm just looking around all the time. And I kind of think this out as the choice to wake up every day and say, what does the world have to offer me? The hugged brain versus what is the world going to do to me today? And the child's neurobiology adapts to prioritize survival over continued development. And so what this picture is showing us that we actually know now that this prefrontal cortex, this executive functioning, is starting to shrink in the brain because it's underused. We know that trauma can interfere with a child's ability to comply with adults. The narrative is that you didn't show up and you're not to be trusted. I'm on my own. We know that it can interfere with initiating healthy relationships, not just in childhood, but throughout the lifespan, developing this inner talk, this inner self of shame and worthlessness. It affects communication. It affects our ability to solve problems. It affects our ability to hold empathy for others. So many of these things we know as we're seeing some of these things in our current events, even of today. But the great news is that relationships are our pathway towards resilience. So the most powerful agent for the healing of a child's brain or an individual's brain after toxic stress and trauma is a relationship. Supportive relationships can buffer that young child from that prolonged state of toxic stress. And the good news, the great news, again, I think, like I said, those early pioneers were saying it, but now these brain scans are showing it, that the brain can and will change according to its experience, which goes back to this idea of integration and us being somewhat responsible for that for ourselves. And so by providing meaningful experiences with children or with another individual, we can build resiliency. I know we are at 12:31. I think I have one more slide and one little tiny short video. So in building resiliency, we know that the brain develops because of nature and nurture. It doesn't have to be nature versus nurture. We get these genes, but we also have the opportunity to make meaningful experiences happen in our life and for these small humans that are in our space of co-regulation. Resiliency is this ability to bounce back and adapt. Some people I've heard, it's not survival of the fittest, survival of the most adaptable. Resiliency is not something you are born with or without. It's not, you're not destined with the color of your eyes, the color of your hair, although I used that example with my 11-year-old and practicing for this. And she said, well, they do have colored eye lenses now and you could dye your hair. But the point is that the brain can build experiences. You can build on it. It's a continuum. And the more that we practice resiliency, the more that we learn how to do it and the more that we wire the brain to become what we talked about in the beginning, this complete brain model that becomes a prediction machine for us. And the one point I always want to make clear is that it's a false statement when we all just say children are so resilient. Children bounce back from anything and everything. They'll be just fine. The truth, and this is where so many of you come in and all of the roles that you, I imagine, play, whether you're in education, whatever role you are in serving these kiddos, is children are resilient in the presence of a resilient mother. Humans are often resilient in the presence of resilient others. And so to transition into the Strong Roots program, I wanted to say that to nurture resilience in children, we need to build the capacity of the adults who care for them and provide the supports that they need. And if I could, I'm going to end with these two short little videos that I must say I never get enough of watching, that I feel like can really summarize this sort of presentation and the work that we do. I'm going to see if I can do it for you without making, let's see, I'm going to have to go back to sharing my screen. Get you there. Almost there, sharing my screen. I'm going to hope for audio, share computer sound. And let's see.
You is kind, you is smart, you is important.
Can we hear it?
You is smart, you is
We're seeing co-regulation. We're seeing the hug.
That's so good.
I love that because it also demonstrates that that crazy about you person and that co-regulation is not, it doesn't always even have to lie in just a parent or caregiver role. It could be someone that steps into your life, an educator, the person that delivers the mail to you. Someone shows up and tells you over and over again that you is kind, you is important. And then this next one is what we store for ourselves. Listen to this little kiddo who someone has co-regulated, and he is on his way to school.
I am smart. I am blessed. I can do anything. I am smart. I am blessed. I can do anything. I am smart. I am
So again, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for the work that you do. And I hope you have a mantra that you say to yourself every day so that you are in that space of resiliency, not just for yourself, but also for that idea of how we still continue to co-regulate others.
Thank you so much, Carly. That was awesome. I love that ending. It was so cute. Celeste, do you want to introduce the next speaker?
Yes. So our next speaker is going to be Rena Menke. Rena is a clinical psychologist with over 15 years of experience working with pregnant and postpartum women and their children in clinical and research settings. Rena's involvement in Mom Power and Strong Roots includes leading, supporting, implementation, and consulting with groups.
Thank you, Celeste. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen as well. And so I am really excited to be here to talk with you guys a little bit about the Strong Roots programs. I do want to let you know that because I'm screen sharing, I can see like my slides, but I can't necessarily see you guys. So if you have questions or if you have anything that you want to check in as I'm going through it, if you would just unmute yourself and say, hey, Rena. And Michelle is also, of course, monitoring the chat section so that she, if there are things that come through there, she's gonna shout those out too. I just want to check, are you guys seeing my screen with, are you seeing the screen with the slides?
So we see the screen with the slides, and then I also see your, oh, what is that called? Like the view options. So if you want to hide that, where it says more, and you were just right there. Yep, go there and then hide floating meeting controls halfway in.
Thank you.
There,
Does that
thank
create,
you.
that's okay, good. It's not
Better.
creating a box then. I've had some places where I've done that and then it shows like a little box over top of it too. Thanks, Michelle. All right, so what I want to do today is share a little bit with you about the Strong Roots programs. And so I, along with Eric Donald and Nicole Miller, will be talking a bit about the Strong Roots programs. It's split into two pieces where I'm going to start talking about Mom Power, and then Eric and Nicole are going to talk about Fraternity of Fathers. But Strong Roots is a program that was created at the University of Michigan by Drs. Maria Music and Dr. Kate Rosenblum, along with Melissa Schuster, who is a social worker. And it's a wonderful program because we have a nice interdisciplinary team who developed it. We have Dr. Music, who's a psychiatrist, Dr. Rosenblum, who is a clinical and developmental psychologist, and then Melissa Schuster, who is a social worker. So we have a nice, well-rounded way of being able to look and think about families and about women and men, and then thinking about how they can support, how individuals can support them. And I'll let Nicole, maybe if she wants to talk later about FOF, because Nicole is one of the developers of FOF too. So I'll let her speak a bit about that. Our objectives for today are to think about Strong Roots, the basis of them, what the interventions are, and then also thinking about the outcomes. And then we want to talk a little bit about how the Strong Roots programs, Mom Power and FOF, mitigate ACEs. So ACEs are the adverse childhood experiences. And this is one way to be able to think a bit about the traumatic experiences that Carly was just referring to. In the 1990s, there were researchers who were examining factors that influence biological health. And so what they were finding is, as I was digging through this and learning a bit about it, there was a secretary who was in a heart clinic, and she was having different people coming to the clinic, and they were presenting with different behaviors of anxiety or either more lackadaisical. And there were some pretty consistent ways that people were presenting that then mapped onto their adverse childhood experiences. And so we think about adverse childhood experiences in three different categories. There's abuse, which could be physical, emotional, or sexual. There's neglect, which is typically physical or emotional. And then there's household dysfunction. So either a parent or an individual within the household has a mental illness. An individual may be incarcerated. A mother was potentially treated violently, maybe some substance abuse or divorce. So typically what's done in a research setting, and is now being even transferred oftentimes into clinical settings, is looking at kind of what is the total number of ACEs that a person experienced, and how does this potentially predict individuals' outcomes and how they adapt in different situations. Through years and years of research, what's been found is that if people have equal to or greater than 4 of these experiences, they're much more likely to have a difficult or a difficult reaction in various situations. So some of the outcomes that occur from individuals having more than 4 ACEs are listed here. So there may be some behavioral changes, a lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, or potentially missed work. There's also some physical and mental health consequences. There could be obesity, diabetes, symptoms of depression, suicide attempts, STDs. I'll let you guys read them. I don't need to read them to you, but you can see that there are a lot of different pieces on here that can influence a person's functioning and also influence outcomes long and short term. So let's bring this back to thinking about children and abuse and how does this then impact resiliency? What we also know from years of research is that as individuals have adverse childhood events, this of course influences their emotional, physical, social functioning, and that can then influence how they might parent their children or how they might interact with their children. The way that we describe this in research and in thinking about clinical application is it's an intergenerational transmission of risk. It's a big kind of word and saying to describe this pattern. So essentially, it could be that maybe one individual had a parent who had some mental health concerns, and then they raise a child who then also has mental health concerns, and then their child has mental health concerns. It becomes this pattern. And I do want to say what's wonderful about what Carly highlighted and what's wonderful about the interventions that we're going to be presenting is that there are strategies for being able to mitigate this transmission of risk. People can step in and they can create that hug that Carly was talking about to help stop the process and help people to be resilient and help them to be stronger. So to think a little bit about populations as they're presenting for services or presenting for care, a few years ago, we looked at the data in the Women and Infant Mental Health Clinic at the University of Michigan. And so the Women and Infant Mental Health Clinic is a clinic within the Department of Psychiatry that provides psychiatric assessments as well as therapies to women and men as well as they're coming in for services. In looking at that data, what we found was that 30% of individuals as they were coming in for services presented with an ACEs of 4 or more. So you can see that it's a pretty prevalent occurrence for individuals. One of the other projects that we've recently been working on is the Infant Mental Health Home Visiting Project. And as a part of that, what we found was that 44% of individuals in the home visiting program had ACEs of 4 or more. So it's pretty high prevalence of occurrence. Eric and Nicole also shared from their data collection pieces that as they were collecting and working with men with men in their program, that there were at least 40% of individuals presenting to services with an ACEs of 4 or more. So it's pretty comparable. If we look at that, and these are, this data is from Starfish Family Services, and maybe Nicole and Eric can speak a bit more to this, but I believe that most of the individuals were in the home visiting programs, and I'm trying to find my Zoom thing so I can look at Eric and Nicole to confirm that, but I'm not finding it.
So these would have been men who participated in the evaluation of the Fraternity of Fathers implementation. So they would not necessarily have been enrolled in home visiting programs, but they were enrolled in the Fraternity of Fathers program.
Thanks, Nicole. So essentially what we are identifying here is that there is an intergenerational transmission of risk, is that if a person experiences abuse or experiences ACEs as a child, they're more likely to then engage in behaviors that result in them potentially working with their children in ways that create more risk for their children as well. But what we know from what Carly was saying and from our research is that with effective intervention, we're able to break this cycle, and we're able to provide resources to parents and children to help them to stop this cycle. So this is where Mom Power comes in. And so Mom Power was originally developed in, I think it was around 2009, 2007. And it was developed based on a couple of different pieces. There were some women that were being seen at the Corner Health Clinic, and they were coming in with different trauma experiences, and there wasn't a lot of resources for them. And Dr. Music had conducted a project called Maternal Anxiety During the Childbearing Year. And with that maternal anxiety during the childbearing year, it was meeting with women who were pregnant, postpartum, and talking with them about their experiences growing up and becoming a parent and becoming a parent of children. So taking those two pieces of information together based on the services that were helpful for women and then what they were seeing within the clinic, Dr. Music, Dr. Rosenblum, and Melissa Schuster worked together to create this program. So Mom Power and the Strong Roots programs have 5 core components. It's an attachment-based program. And so what that means is that we use attachment-based psychoeducation and training to be able to speak with parents and help them to understand children's behavior and interactions and what children's behavior is demonstrating and what they need. I'm going to show you one of the core tools that we use. It's called the tree. So I'll show you a video of that in just a minute. We also focus on helping parents to promote social support and to identify who is their village, who are the people that they reach out to support them. And even within the groups, women are able to come together and support one another. And I have to say, I have to give a shout out because I know that I saw a couple of the names on there. We have the Washtenaw, we call it our Washtenaw Community Collaborative. So in Washtenaw County, the Community Health Services grant provided us with funding to be able to work with the Washtenaw Intermediate School District and to support and implement Mom Power within the Washtenaw community. And so Colleen Close with the Parent Advisors Committee at Washtenaw Intermediate School District has a group of parent advisors who have been working with women who have gone through the Mom Power groups. And they're coming together and they're talking about and using the Strong Roots concepts to think about their children and supporting their children and supporting one another. This has been an awesome way for parents to come together, create resilience around social support, thinking about their children. And so I just want to acknowledge that Colleen's on here and just say thank you, Colleen, for everything that you're doing with the groups and helping to support them. I also want to give a shout out because I saw Althea Wilson on here and Darlene Holiday. Darlene and Althea are both trained Mom Power facilitators. Althea helped to run a virtual Mom Power group last summer, and she's also one of the Strong Roots core trainers. So we have a lot of different ways that we're working with the community here in Washtenaw County and being able to support individuals. And we can provide you guys with the resources and things for connecting people that you might have interested in joining the Mom Power groups. But that social support is able to go from that time of the group, but then also it's generalized into the general interactions with individuals too. We also work on service connection. So if a person is presenting with some physical needs of needing diapers, needing to connect with a mental health professional, then we're able to help support them in finding someone that meets their needs and helps them. We focus on parent-child interactions. There are two ways that we do this. And so this is kind of thinking about that hug that Carly was alluding to. We focus on it as promoting joy and positive interactions between parents and children. And helping parents to think about, like, what are the things that you do with your child that are fun? What are some of the barriers that get in the way of you doing something fun with your children? And we call that sunshine time. For the behaviorists out there, you might think about special time in terms of parents and children interacting with one another and having that special specific time. This is similar to that, with a big emphasis and focus on having it be positive interactions and how you can make it positive and how you can make it fun. The other way that we do it is with a child team. So with in-person groups, of course, due to COVID, we're not able to have in-person groups right now, but with in-person groups, we have a mom team that facilitates a group, and then we have a child team that facilitates the group. The child team, parents are able to bring their children to the group. They go with a safe, well-trained individual that plays with their child during that time and helps their child to be able to be ready to interact with the parent as well. And while the parent is in group, they're learning about the attachment-based concepts, social support. If they're needing service connection, they're getting connected with the services, and I'll talk about self-care in a minute. And then during child team, parents and children come together and they interact with one another in a structured environment that helps them to feel good about being with one another. The last core component of Mom Power is self-care. So thinking about all of the different things that people encounter in life and thinking about self-care is about what is it that a parent has to do to be able to restore their emotional balance and be able to interact and be present with their child and be present with themselves in a way that they're proud of and comfortable with. So we have a number of different self-care activities that we go through with parents and teach them to do and talk about kind of barriers that prevent them from being able to engage in self-care and how they can do this consistently for themselves. So what I want to do is I want to share with you a little bit about, let's see. I'm going ahead a little bit. Sorry, guys. Michelle, how do I get that one screen back up to switch over? Actually,
Sure. So go ahead and hit escape.
Hit escape. Okay,
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay,
There you
so
go.
I think though I might be able to get the video to come up in a different way. Let me open this. Okay, can you guys see this YouTube video now? Or YouTube?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so what I want to do is share with you guys this this video that illustrates the tree and the core concepts of the tree. And please let me know if you can't hear it. It's quiet at first, so. Is the sound coming through?
Yes.
No.
The tree
Beautiful.
represents ways that children learn, grow, and thrive. When a child feels safe and secure, she feels ready to explore, play, learn, and try new things. Yet even during these times of branching out, a child still needs a secure base, that is her parent or caregiver, to enjoy with her, to help her, and to keep her safe. There are other times when a child feels unsure, scared, hurt, or distressed. At these times, we say he has a need for connection. When parents or caregivers offer a safe haven for their child's feelings, they are meeting their child's need for connection and are nurturing and strengthening his roots. Children develop through the balance of exploration and connection, branching out, and building deeper roots. Parents and caregivers support this growth by providing a secure base and a safe haven for children to explore and connect. Children's inner core strength is built up, ring by ring, through daily experiences of having their needs met by their parents or caregivers when they branch out and build roots. This process begins in earliest infancy when parents hold, nurture, and comfort their child, and continues across childhood and adolescence. Notice that there is a balance between the reach of the branches and the depth of the roots. If the tree's roots are not as wide and thick as the branches, the tree is more vulnerable when strong winds blow. In order to be more resilient, children, just like the tree, need roots that are deep and strong that can help it weather the storm. The sun reminds us that both the branches and the roots need warmth and joy to grow and thrive. When parents or caregivers meet and welcome their children's needs with a sense of delight and acceptance, they provide the sun and warmth that helps their children not just to grow, but to thrive. Just imagine, if every child and family had strong roots, what a beautiful forest our community would be.
So what I actually want to do is I am going to pause this because I don't want it to keep playing, and I want to stop sharing for just a minute. And I want to ask you guys, like, what thoughts, reactions do you have to this video? And you can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself too.
I always like seeing that video. I've seen it a couple of times now. And one of the things that I'm always drawn to is that comparison between the depth and the breadth of the roots and how that is directly impacting and affecting the upper part of the tree. I know that about nature. I mean, I know that looking at my trees in the community, but I think making that a personal connection to a human life, that really always resonates with me.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor to be able to think about, how do we balance these two and how do we keep thinking about people and their needs in these spaces? Colleen, I see you unmuted too.
I was just going to say, I think it's just so relatable. I love it. I know it's something that in the work that I do with the trusted parents and when they are connecting with other parents, that's always refer back to the tree. It's just, I think it's such a great foundation to be able to step back to. So I love the tree. I love that video.
Thank you. And I want to say there are a couple of things in the chat as well. So one person said, I think it provides a really nice visual to reinforce the message. And then another said, I love it. I'll be sharing this video far and wide. And so I do want to say that this video and then a couple of other videos are on YouTube and they're available for you guys to be able to use. And we want you to use them. We want you to take them and use them with anyone that you're using with, to think about development and think about parents' needs, children's needs, and how individuals can be supported with them. And so in the group, we walk parents through thinking about the tree as a metaphor and thinking about children's interactions and what they might be needing. So to give you an example of what we might do with a parent in this situation, is that, and I'm seeing another comment, so I want to attend to that before I tell you what we would do. I feel that as parents, we're not taught to think that the roots start, perhaps even before the child is born, before infancy. And I love this response. And I think, like, I just want to emphasize the question, the statement of, I feel that as parents, we're not taught to think that the roots start, perhaps even before the child is born, before infancy, because you are right on. There's been a lot of research showing that how a parent thinks about their baby before the baby's even born can influence long-term outcomes. And I'm going to highlight some, it's called reflective functioning and mind-mindedness. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how Strong Roots does influence mind-mindedness, but I think that's a wonderful point to bring up and to think about, is how even during infancy, the roots are starting for the parent and the child. What we do with this presentation or with the tree in group is we walk parents through interactions that they're having with their children. We kind of displace it in that we give them examples of interactions between parents and children and ask them to think about, like, this example, how might the tree apply here? But then we ask parents to bring their own experiences and how the tree might apply to that. So I think the most memorable one that I had was a parent who was coming and saying, why does my child keep playing in the toilet? and I remember thinking, like, why does your child keep playing in the toilet? And we used the tree to think about, like, the toilet it's a branching out experience. They're checking it out because they're curious about it and they want to see what's in it. You think about a toilet, it's a pretty interesting thing. But the parent couldn't see that or think about that until we gave the tree to them to help them to be able to think about it. So it really helps to shift that way of parents thinking about their child and meeting their child where they're at. We have another comment. As an OB social worker, I stress the importance of pregnant moms' mental wellness on their unborn child. I can implement as an educational tool as well. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. So I want to come back to the slides because you guys might be like thinking, oh, well, this is great, but does it work? That's where my mind would go. So I want to show you a little bit about what we know about the outcomes of the Strong Roots programs and about Mom Power. So sorry, as I'm shifting through back to my slides again. All right, so Nicole said earlier about a little bit about the randomized controlled trials for FOF, which essentially is a researcher's way of saying we had a group of women or people who went through the program, and then we had people who didn't go through the program, and we compare their information to see whether or not there were actual changes in scores. In the randomized controlled trial for Mom Power, what was found is that individuals' PTSD symptoms decreased across the group, and individuals' symptoms of depression decreased across the group. So Mom Power influences symptoms of depression and PTSD. I spoke a little bit about reflective functioning, mind-mindedness earlier, and the other thing that is just remarkable about Mom Power and wonderful about Mom Power is that it changes how parents think about their children. And thinking about what Carly said earlier, some of the developmental research in child development, this is something that has been thought about for a really long time, and that how parents think about their children then can influence their interactions with them. This is showing that how parents think about their children is important in interactions. We're still working a little bit on the interaction part, but we're at least showing that we can change how parents are thinking about their kids. So from the beginning of group to the end of group, we're able to change how parents are thinking about their kids and change it in a way that helps parents to be more maternally sensitive and are responsive and sensitive to their children's experiences. So the next thing that is incredibly remarkable about the Strong Roots and Mom Power program is that it changes that amygdala function, that core brain functioning that Carly was talking about earlier. And this is incredibly remarkable because this is the only parenting intervention that is available that shows actual fMR data of changing the amygdala and changing in parents' interaction, parents' perceptions of their children's behavior. So I'm not going to go into the methodology of it, but essentially there were empathy, there were changes in the amygdala functioning among parents from pre to post group, which this is amazing to be able to say, like, this program changes actual measured brain functioning. And there are additional really important pieces in terms of thinking about parent-child interactions that are changed here. So there are reductions in bonding problems from the treatment condition, but not for the control condition. So essentially what that means is sometimes what happens with control conditions is that there's a natural decrease over time in changes, but the control condition stayed the same, and there were changes in the treatment condition for bonding problems. There was increased emotional responsiveness in the treatment condition, but not for the control condition. There was a dosing effect of increased mom power attendance. And so essentially what this means is that mothers needed to attend 7 out of 10 sessions to be able to get an effect or to have a change in their scores. We also found some decreases in parenting stress, and there were more targeted referrals. So there were more referrals to mental health professionals after individuals attended the group and attended the program. So I'm seeing a chat in here. And so we have a comment that I think it's great to give parents a place to focus their intention. As individual mentioned, parents are not taught about the roots, how to approach identifying what their children need. These concepts can guide that process. They definitely can guide the process, and they create a nice concrete way for parents to be able to interact with their children, interact with other individuals, and creating that social support and that structure. So what I would like to propose we do now is take about a 10-minute break for individuals to get up and stretch and take a nice deep breath, maybe enjoy the sunshine a little. And then we'll come back and Nicole and Eric will start us out with Fraternity of Fathers.
Yeah, as we're dealing with resilience and talking about resilience, it's important we do self-care. So please take a minute, stretch your legs, get your water, do your bio break, whatever you got to do. Grab your lunch if you haven't done that yet, and come back in about 10 minutes.
Hi, Michelle. It's Pam Millenbach.
How are you, Pam?
Good, good.
Good.
I don't know
You're
if I'm not sure if I ever got signed in. My computer skills are. Well, you know,
I've got you. I knew you were all logged in, so you're good.
And if I can't do this stuff at the end, I'll call you next week.
Okay.
Last time I ended up losing everything.
That's all right. You just reach out to us anytime, okay?
I was born before you guys were even thought of. But it's interesting. Back in the 70s, it was when I was studying at Western in special education, and everything that Carly was saying in relation to early education in the field of special ed, we were learning the exact same things.
Yeah.
That we're hearing now today. I
Yeah.
can see what she says, and again, that was back in the 70s.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to see the cycle of the education and the awareness, and then now just more research supporting all of that and connecting all the dots and all the pieces. I was going to type this in the chat, but I think I'll just say it. Like, I don't know how many trainings I've been in about ACEs and trauma and brain development and all the things. I'm like, oh my gosh, there were things that the presenters have talked about. I'm like, that makes total sense. It finally clicked and resonated about how this really affects and impacts a person's ability to regulate, right? Like, yeah. You think you know it. You think you know it.
Well, you just keep on, you know, and you go to a lot of workshops, trainings, and you keep saying over and over, well, yeah, I've heard that, but it takes something for it to really click.
Yeah. Yep.
This is an excellent. I've always said since I've lived in Michigan, I've been going to your trainings, and they're excellent. Every one of them.
Thanks, Pam.
Defined. I'm very proud of you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, if I can't do all the things at the end and I lose you, I'll call you next week.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think what's that?
Thanks for all you're doing. I wish you were closer.
I know, us too.
We have a child advocacy center here going strong now, and it's in several counties. And we're doing, we're looking at, Jim Henry wants to set us up here with a CTAC.
Good.
We're going to work on the next year. That's due to
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
Things are advancing, but very slow. It's all fun.
I think we're coming to a close on our 10-minute break, and I really would like to just put it out there to everybody. You know, one of the things that's really hard about virtual conferences and lectures and that kind of stuff is we don't get to do that networking piece. So I'm really glad that you logged in there and chimed in and said something to me and said hello. So I miss that. I miss that networking and connecting with everybody. Like Carly said, connections are important. We have to have that piece. So I'll let you all continue on, but I just want to say that. And thank you all for being here today. If you didn't hear me in the very beginning, make sure you have signed in, logged into the chat, because otherwise I can't count the sketch and CEUs for the social work stuff. So thank you, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm going to introduce our last two speakers right now. So our first one is Nicole Miller. She is the research program manager of Zero to Thrive, which is a program that focuses on supporting the well-being and resilience of all families through pregnancy through early childhood. In addition, Ms. Miller is also a co-developer of the Fraternity of Fathers curriculum, which utilizes adventure therapy principles to deliver attachment theory-based content to fathers with young children. And then we have Eric Donald. He received his BA degree in healthcare management from Bellevue University and then MA and PhD degrees in human services and psychology from Bellevue University and North Central University. Since 2016, he has been with the Behavioral Health Department as an infant mental health worker. He's also a fatherhood coordinator and a supports coordinator. So I will let them get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to start off. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I'd like to start off with just what the Fraternity Fathers, what it consists of. As you can see, we do have the attachment-based content that's married with the adventure therapy principles. And it's similar to Mom Power in the sense that we do use Bowlby's attachment theory, but there are some differences because we found that with the fathers, disseminating the information to them looked a little different. So they were more interested in the adventure-based principles that we apply, which consist of activities. And what we do is we take those activities and we draw correlations from the activities to like, what does those activities, how do they relate to, fatherhood? And the dads were very receptive to that approach. So it's supposed to have been more of the didactic approach that's used in Mom Power. Is more experiential with the Fraternity of Fathers. But it's also similar in the fact that the Fraternity of Fathers is also a 10-week program that consists of 13 sessions. They're typically about 90 minutes per session. Next slide, please. Thanks, Rena. So as you can see here, this is a quote, and this quote essentially sums up like the work that we do with the Fraternity of Fathers. As you can see, it said, it is through action and engagement and meaningful experiences and reflecting on the impact of those experiences that learning occurs. So that is like the number one tenet of FOF. Like, we're trying to have participants come in and be very intentional and mindful of like, what is their point A from A to point B. And also some of the core tenets of FOF, based on the adventure beliefs part, is that in those groups, we try to build safety, trust, effective communication, challenge, enjoyment, empowerment, and we want to create a sense of belonging. So some of the differences between FOF and Mom Power, as I spoke earlier, is that FOF focuses more on the process. Like, what did we notice? Like, what do you think? What do you feel? And as for dads, as individuals, we would like to focus on who are they, as men first. Then we pivot over to like, who are they as fathers? And we try to accomplish that within the first couple of weeks of the 10-week sessions. And unlike Mom Power, we do not focus on self-care. Thanks. So what does this look like? And Nicole, if you don't mind stepping in and
Yeah. So I thought what we could do is adventure therapy, as Eric already mentioned, is quite a bit different in its delivery than sort of a more didactic therapy. So I thought actually what we could do right now is do a piece of the curriculum and sort of see what this looks like. So I'm going to ask everybody to turn on their cameras. I don't care what y'all look like, it's Friday. Everyone's allowed to look in any way that they want. And we are going to do an activity. And we need to be able to see each other, so. Okay. And this is an activity that we do use in the curriculum. We have just completed the virtual adaptation of this group, and this translates, so we do it virtually as well. And if you aren't in a space where you have a camera, that's totally okay too. Okay, so I am going to read a series of statements where you will have a choice of which you agree with or which relates most to who you are today. What I want you to do during this activity is pay attention not only to how you respond, but to how those in this group, everyone else on the screen, responds. And then we're going to debrief afterwards and talk a little bit about what you noticed and what you saw. Okay, so the first statement, if you agree with the first choice, I want you to show me an open palm. If you agree with the second, I want you to show me a fist, and I'll remind you of that along the way in case anyone forgets. So the first statement is, when buying a new tool, device, or toy, I either read the instructions or I never read the instructions. What would you say about yourself? We have a whole lot of instruction readers. Okay, the next one is, I prefer to watch sports or play sports. Okay. I like my eggs scrambled or over easy. Okay. I either find time for myself every week or I never find time for myself during the week. All right, interesting. Okay. This one is a highly debated one. I shower at night or in the morning. We've had some heated discussions over this one. Okay. I like the weather cool or warm. Okay. Yeah, I think we're all of the cool weather at this point, primarily. Being an adult is what I expected or way harder than I expected. Okay. All right, I would rather go to a city or into nature. Okay. When picking a movie, I would choose a drama or a comedy. Okay. So I'm curious as I'm asking these questions, I just want to pause and sort of get input. Do people feel like their answers are consistent with what they would have been pre-COVID? Or do people feel like they're answering differently now? Go ahead, just unmute yourself and respond as you see. How has sort of the time we're living in influenced how you might be? Althea, you said definitely different. Other people are kind of nodding their heads.
So the city and the nature one, that one I'm like, ooh, if it was pre-COVID, like totally city, but now it's like, I'd want to go to nature.
Yeah, like how context is sort of influencing maybe a decision we would make. I also was thinking that about comedy or drama. Like, I don't know who needs extra drama right now. Is that something that we're still interested in, or does everybody just kind of want a relief? Okay. When I encounter a challenge, I either handle it myself or I ask for help. So that one is a pretty even split. Does anybody want to talk about why they picked what they picked? And again, just unmute yourself and go for it.
I think for me, usually I try to do it. And if I cannot, that's when I go to help.
Okay, but your inclination is to do it yourself first.
Yeah, but I think it has to do also with my personal growth and traumas, I had to say, because most of the time people don't have time. And so sometimes when you ask for help initially, they send you back like, oh, look at it yourself, or like, try to understand it yourself. And like, well, I kind of already did, and obviously I couldn't. That's why I'm already asking for help. And I feel like with kids, that happens a lot of the time, and we neglect that, or you haven't even looked at it. Like, you know, we kind of like don't acknowledge that kids know what they know. And a lot of times they really are very upfront on that. And then they, you know, we neglect it completely. And we kind of like want to push them harder, but I feel like that's when, you know, situations like that develop. Like I get help until I'm like, okay, I already broke this. I don't even know how I'm gonna fix it. Now I need help, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it happens a lot.
I love that you said we don't acknowledge that kids know what they know. Like that they can acknowledge this is beyond my capacity and I'm asking for help because I need it. Yeah. What about anyone else? Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say for me, I don't like not knowing something that I need to know and figure out. So I ask for help. But if I run into that person who I don't know, makes me feel like not smart for asking for their help, that feeling, then I I don't like that. So I tend to go to the same people who may not be the experts in what I actually need to know, to avoid those people that, I don't know, that might make me feel like I should already know this.
That's such a great point. We go back to those people that we know are the solid relationship. So maybe you don't know the answer to this either, but I know that you're kind of like Carly talked about, you're a person who's given me a hug. And even if you don't know and I don't know, you might help me through it, or we can not know together, but they won't make you feel small. Yeah. Okay.
I guess I was thinking about it from the perspective of, I've just over time realized that I don't always maybe know the best way to do something or to resolve a situation. And so asking for help has the benefit of hearing, possibly another perspective or another, maybe that they have a thought that I hadn't had yet. And so.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, Pam, because I was kind of thinking that same thing of like, I like to ask people to help with something. And then I'm like, okay, I want to protect their time. So then I'm like, oh, do I really want to ask them to help? Because do they have the time? Or, I just get into this cycle of, I'll just do it because I don't want to bother them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, I think that, yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, I think it depends what it is. There's a lot of contingencies there.
And it depends on kind of our previous experiences. So did we have that privilege of being able to ask for help? What's sort of our template? What did we learn? Is it okay to ask for help? Is it okay not to know? Is it okay to bother people? Yeah.
I was going to add that is what I was thinking about, my template, because personally and professionally, whenever it was okay to ask for help, but I always needed to try something first, because I find myself always saying to people and being asked, what did you try first? Because it was all about raising independent thinkers. And it's like, sure, I'll help you tie your shoe, but what did you try first? Right? So
yeah,
the template is important, I find.
How can we partner in this? I want to build on the knowledge and experience that you already have. Yeah, that's a really good point.
I was just going to say that I think Althea's comment really resonated for me. That really a lot of the time it has to do with, do I feel safe asking this person for help, right? And what that experience might be. So I echo that.
Absolutely. So I have a couple more I'm going to run through and then we're going to debrief this. I wish I had more time with my family or more time for myself. Okay. I wet my toothbrush before the toothpaste or after the toothpaste. Okay. I use a kind or a firm voice most of the time. Okay. I would rather fold laundry or do the dishes. Quite personally, I'm tired of both of those at this point. All right. When going on a road trip, I drive. I'm the person who's like, I'm driving, or I'm taking a nap in the back. I like the people who are the drivers. There was no hesitation. They were like, slide over. This is my spot. All right. I would rather meet one friend for coffee or go to a party, if we remember what those are. Okay. Last one, I prefer to lead or participate.
Where's the depends button?
So that's a really good question. And that typically comes up. These are very like, you got to pick one or the other. So I'm always interested to see. And I saw you at one point, you were like this, but this, You know, how do you, it's not always that black and white. Often it so depends on the circumstance. Like, who's the one friend I get to meet for coffee? Is it someone stressful? Maybe I do want to go to a party. You know, it can kind of depend. So I guess I want to debrief. What did you guys notice during this activity, both in yourself and in the other little faces on the screen? What do people notice?
I would just agree with Latrice that a lot of the questions I felt like, well, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed like a middle ground sometimes.
Yeah, so much of life is circumstantial. Depends. And someone else said there's hesitation. Is that hesitation about how you feel and sort of that it depends? Or do people feel like there might be hesitation around how are other people going to answer?
I think it depends on the context. Like, you know, like you were saying, like going to a party or meeting with a friend. I mean, like that depends on the friend. Driving or like sitting on the back. If I'm pretty tired, I know it's unsafe to drive. So I would tell the other person, please drive, let me take a nap and I will drive later.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, you know, so a lot of that would be contextual, I think.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like it depends too. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's where I found myself at too. I was often looking away. I didn't want to look at anybody else. And I also wanted to think about what I was doing or thinking, feeling about what you're asking. And yeah, it every question, it was somewhere in the middle for me, you know.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that.
With your question about whether or not I ask for help, I think I don't ask for help enough. And so I try to teach my children to do that. So I remember when I was in college, I would never go to the professors because I thought I should have already known it, or I should have read literally everything, every textbook before I went to them to ask for a question, which is, of course, ridiculous. So I'm constantly trying to convince my children that it's okay to go to professors and ask questions and go ask for help. So anyway.
Yeah. Trying to reset that expectation for when can people help you.
Right.
Yeah.
It felt good to be asked these questions too. I think a lot of times we make assumptions. I had no idea, for instance, that people wet their toothbrush after the toothpaste is already on. And so it's just nice to hear from people and note what they have to say. So that felt good.
Yeah, it goes back to what someone said previously about perspectives, like wouldn't have even thought that was a thing with the toothbrush. I've had someone who was it before and after. They felt very strongly about that. What about feelings? Did anybody notice any feelings coming up while they were doing this?
I was going to say that perhaps I'm still in my like thinking out brain space, but I have written down on the piece of paper, watching people have what I call brain interruptions. Mm-hmm. So thinking one really out hard, I could see people in like a thinking space. And then you said the toothpaste one and you could see that brain interruption, like, yeah, settle in and kind of laugh more about that one. Like I really was observing the ones that kind of dug people in to that thinking space, perspective, context, maybe what somebody else was looking at them or not. And then the ones where it was a brain break, smile.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the hardest one for me was the one about, do I ask for help? And for me, I've always been the nurturer, the helper, you know, and so it's hard to separate. Well, what do I do in my own when things come up? And that's one I did have to think about, because I usually will tackle it, you know, just like Mr. Luna said. And if I need help, then I don't have any problem asking for help if I need it. But typically that's what I'll do. But I had to think about that one. It was uncomfortable because, you know, typically I'm the one who's helping other people.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about translating this to parenthood, because we're doing this with dads. Do you get to ask for help? Is that a privilege that you have? Is that a luxury you feel like you can afford? Can you admit when you don't know? Yeah, or are you supposed to be the one who knows?
Yeah. I think those are great questions. And, you know, I think as a father, you know, I have 6 kids, and, you know, they range from 25 down to 10. And, you know, they know me very well. They know what I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have any problem with my family and asking for the help I need. The part about self-care is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a little bit different. Help is
Yeah.
not self-care. Yeah.
Yeah.
The one I paused on was the question related to a firm voice, or was it a friendly voice? I'm forgetting.
Kind, firm or kind.
Yeah. And I raised my hand for kind, and I was thinking, that's my intent. I wonder if that's how it's perceived.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know that we are good judges of something like that.
Yes, this is all about our own perception. What's my intent versus what's the impact? Absolutely. Any other feelings that came up during this?
I was thinking in just that brief moment with the asking for help question and just sort of processing when do I ask for help? Who do I ask for help? What that looks like for me. I was really thinking about, wow, that's something that might be a barrier to my learning and my growth, and thinking, okay, how has that impacted my ability to learn new things? And just thinking of being in school, and someone had mentioned telling her children to ask professors for help. And there were some professors that I went to regularly and others that I didn't. And it did impact my learning, you know, and what I was able to get from the experience. So that was something that, and just in that very short, brief moment, that question really made me think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, for me, the asking for help too was kind of like made me think more on like, you know, what is the way somebody asks for help?
Mm-hmm.
Because not everybody verbalizes it. I think every one of us were thinking more like somebody asking us a question. But I think there is a lot of like, you know, unverbal language that goes around. And I was thinking like, well, you know, with the kids, sometimes, you know, they'll ask them to do something and they just sit there quiet. They don't do anything. And I think for me, I usually try to say, you know, like, hey, you know, how is it going? You know, like, are you getting these? And, you know, what I found out is like there are different ways to ask for help, right? Like, sometimes they start, you know, acting out because, you know, walking around, running in the classrooms because they don't know it. And they are like the fight or flight. But I kind of like think that, you know, their communication is like, I don't know how to do it, so I'm just gonna run around the room, you know. And
that is such a good point.
And if you don't know how to see that that's their way to ask for help, they want your attention, and you're more like, you know, like I think unfortunately our education systems have the punitive, you know, approach more than like, you know, I'm wondering what's going on. It's more like sit down or I'll do something, right? Like,
yeah.
So I think a lot of times I always try to remind myself, like, you know, ask what's going on. You know, maybe he's done with the stuff and he's very smart, or she's very smart and she got it done real quick. And she's like, you know, I have plenty of time to run around now and be, doing something other than this. But I think that's the part that like made me think about, like, you know, what is it sometimes, what does it mean to ask for help?
Yeah, well, and you saying that makes me think of, you know, going back to what Carly said at the beginning of this and about relationships, like how well does someone know you? Do you, you know, and what does it mean as a child to know that someone knows you well enough that they can read through what we call a miscue So I'm running around or I'm getting angry and I'm acting out. But does someone know me so well that they know that me acting out is because I'm ashamed that I don't know, but I can't ask for help? So how, with the little people in our lives and with the families that we work with, how can we help that relationship that they can understand those verbal and the nonverbal cues and what it means? Yeah, that is such a good point. Does anybody recall a question where they felt like they were in either the minority or the majority of who voted which way? And did that kind of trigger any thoughts or feelings for you when you're thinking about, you know, your peer group in an activity? Did that bring up anything?
Yes, this is Darlene. For me, I was socialized to not ask for help, and it was actually viewed as a sign of weakness. If you needed help or asked someone for help, then that meant that you can't do it. And so they didn't say those words, but that's what was modeled for me. So as an adult, it's very difficult for me to ask for help. And when I see children, I just imagine that they may have been socialized the same way. And so I try to anticipate or to look for signs that they're in distress and not even call attention to it. Just start helping them and not even say, hey, let me help you with this.
Yeah. To know them so well, you can step in and be a support without them having to ask and without it having to be sort of explicitly have a light shine on it, but just to step in and be a support.
Yes.
And to help regulate. So how can people think about this exercise being useful in the context of what we've been talking about in the work that we do? So thinking about supporting families to support children, how could this exercise be useful?
I think just, you know, an initial thing is for parents to see, you know, our group, I think it's fair to say on every question, while there may have been a majority, there were definitely people on both sides. And so for parents to see that, you know, that they're not alone, that there are others who are viewing things or approaching things the same way that they are.
Yeah.
I think just like what happened here, where there were conversations around some of the topics, I think the same thing that can be so powerful in parent groups to have those conversations and hear different opinions and thoughts about topics. So.
I think it's important for people to know that different perspectives are valid and that there's reason why we've arrived at the perspectives we had, you know, based on our stories, and they're all important and all valid.
So true. We actually spend a bit of time in the Fraternity of Fathers curriculum, particularly in this 1 week. We talk a lot and do a lot of exercises around perspectives. And how exactly what you said, if you had been in that person's story every step of the way, their behavior makes total sense. Or, you know, Rena brought up the example of the little one playing in the toilet. You know, if we can put ourselves in the mindset of a 3-year-old, that actually can make a lot of sense, even though to an adult, you're like, that's gross in so many ways. To a 3-year-old mind, it can be so exciting.
I think this exercise in particular helps practice empathy, but also the self-reflection. So it's a twofold. It's a good thing.
Yeah. So we do this on week 1. It's one of the first activities that we do in the curriculum for FOF. And I have to say, something that I noticed within this group was, first of all, when I said everyone turn on your cameras, that a few of you were like, we're going to step up and do it. But then within a couple of questions that people were smiling, like people seemed to be having fun, which for a Friday at 1:40, I'm going to take as a success. I think the virtual world can get really tiring sometimes. And people looked like they were having a good time. I could see people really, you weren't just like, no one will know if I'm not really believing this. Like people were really being thoughtful in their responses. I saw a little bit of the like, yes, but no, but yes, which makes total sense because like we've already talked about context. The other thing that I noticed as a facilitator was regardless of how you felt coming into the activity or sort of how you thought through the process, everybody stepped up. Like people could have said, I'm just going to leave now because it's a virtual room and no one will see me. But you didn't. Everybody made a choice to step up and participate in the activity. And I think that's something that we often don't give credit for. You get credit when the thing is done, or when you're a perfect parent, or when you could do it when you didn't have to ask for help, or you get credit at the end. And I think we often forget to give ourselves, and I think parents sometimes don't get credit for just stepping up. Like you showed up on a Friday at 1 o'clock. And I think kind of allowing yourself the grace and credit for that. Or when you have parents joining a parents group, I'm going to say it, particularly dads. This is not a common space. And we hear over and over and over from dads, no one's ever asked me about my kids. I've never thought about this stuff. I've never talked about this stuff. And that they show up on week 1. That's an accomplishment and something I think to be acknowledged. And that it takes courage. Anything else as we wrap this
I was
up?
wondering, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So is this more focused for, on parents, like, the father figures, and like, I was wondering what's your, what is what you guys have observed, like how do parents take these, or fathers more specifically, take these, like now it's time to think about your family more than, so I think as fathers, and I'm going to talk about myself, is like, we're raised more like you're the provider, you're supposed to know everything, like that question about the instructions and all that. You shouldn't even read the instructions. You're supposed to know these, how to change a flat tire and all that.
Yeah.
And so many of us probably don't know that, right?
Mhm.
And so I was wondering what has been the response from fathers specifically when you've done this kind of exercises and stuff.
Yeah. Eric, do you want to take that, or do you want me to answer?
Oh, that's fine, Nicole. As you can imagine, the responses, they vary because we work with a population of people that come from like all walks of life. But typically what happens is, and I think what I'm also going to do is, Rena, if you don't mind, can you pull up the next slide? Because that could be like a segue to go off into that. So what happens is, that's usually like one of the first opportunities for some of the dads that we encounter to even have that space to ever, like Nicole said, sometimes this is the first time that they've ever been asked some of these questions. It's been the first time that maybe that they've ever felt that someone genuinely care about, some of the things that they've experienced throughout their lives. So I think that, I'm sorry, it was the other slide, Rena. I'm sorry. The one right before that. Like the outcomes.
Is this when we're going in the other direction?
Yep.
Go forward. Thank you, Rena, for driving. Eric and I are napping in the back seat.
I'm sorry. No, it was the other one. And I apologize. It was because the point I was going to make was just like, these are some of the outcomes that we've experienced, like after dads have completed the FOF groups. So coming in, of course, they're apprehensive. I know that one of the, I heard someone mention earlier, it is difficult to get in front of a group of strangers and to talk about traumas that you've experienced in your life for the very first time. So that in itself, that's huge. So as you can imagine, as the dads become more comfortable, those reactions change, to answer your question. So we've seen it where some dads have come in initially not as willing to open up, but then by the time the 10 weeks expire, they're more than willing to express some of the things that they've experienced. And they also I think express delightment and enjoyment as well. So just briefly, I'll be real quick because I am being mindful of the time. So some of the outcomes that we've noticed that we noticed after dads have completed the group is that their parenting stress decreased. Children, they rate I'm sorry, I have some background noise. Sorry. So children are rated as less difficult, improved self-reported parenting child interactions, increase in mental health treatment seeking, and improved self-rated parent efficiency. And we think a lot of this is due in part to the fact that, again, this is probably the first time that a lot of these men have had a safe space to be able to reflect on their lives. And so when you look at the increase in the mental health treatment seeking, this could be due in part to the fact that upon them having the opportunity to reflect on some of their past traumas, that they realize that the next step in the process is to try to seek some sort of mental health treatment. Next slide. Sorry.
I will also say, just as sort of a piggyback from that, that answer, that this is really the process that we do with different activities for 10 weeks. So we may focus 1 week on what are the range of feelings that you experience? How do you know? What do they look like? How do they feel in your body? And then what do you do with them? That might be something that we focus on. We might focus on, what was your dad like? What was it like growing up in your family as a child? And sort of what was modeled or not modeled for you? So we touch all of these different, and what do you want to model for your children? We touch on all of these different things, but it's all done in this really reflective, what did you notice? How did you feel? Practice. So it builds and builds and builds through the 10 weeks.
I have a couple questions if I can. Is that okay?
Yeah.
The first one would be, how are folks referred to this program? And then the other one, I'm just wondering, I used to be the abuse consultation team social worker, so quite a bit of history with intimate partner violence. And I'm wondering if you all perhaps partner with like better intervention programs at all, if there's any connections that are there, because I could certainly see this as being useful for co-parenting.
Yeah.
And a lot of different ways where this could be helpful. So I just want
Yeah, that's a really interesting pairing. We've had dads participate who were mandated to do a parenting class through CPS, but never with an IPD. We've never done that. So that's an interesting thought as a connection or a collaboration. We do have, I think it's week 9 of the 10 weeks. We have a whole session where we talk about conflict styles and communication. So how do you communicate? What does it look like? What is it, when you're faced with a conflict? And co-parenting, that is a piece that we talk about a lot. So that is a really good point. As far as how people are referred, Eric, I'll let you take that one.
Absolutely. So the referral process, it consists of, okay, so I work with Starfish Family Services. So primarily when we're in person, we are servicing individuals throughout Wayne County. But now that we're doing the groups virtually, we're essentially accepting participants throughout Southeast Michigan. So what I'm going to do in the chat, I'm going to put my email in there. Feel free to screenshot it or jot it down. And if there's any dads that you may think would benefit from the Fraternity of Fathers or maybe interested in the Fraternity of Fathers, feel free to share my information with them. You're welcome. I think you were muted, but I read your lips. You're welcome.
All right, so we're pretty much out of time, but I want to see if anybody had questions, any more questions.
I was just going to say that, Nicole. I know
I
that we're
read your
coming up on
mind.
our 2-hour mark. So before people sign off, because I know that some people have to leave right at 2 for other obligations, I want to make sure that everybody knows that we appreciate you all being here. I know there's lots of ups and downs every day. So I just appreciate everybody showing up today and being a part of the conversation. And if you look in the chat, there will be a link to the evaluation. So please take a moment to click into that, provide us with some feedback, and also make sure that we've met the outcomes for today. It's part of some of the social work and sketch stuff. So please make sure you fill that out. And then also, make sure you sign out because we have to have that in the chat. And we will be sending out all of the certificates and all of that stuff next week after I check everything off in terms of attendance and that kind of stuff. If you have further questions, I will keep this open for a bit longer. So feel free to hang out and have conversations, network, do the things that we are used to doing in these types of environments. I think Liz or Celeste will throw the link for the evaluation into the chat. So just hold on a second. They'll throw that in there for you. And then we will also send out a follow-up email just in case anybody had to log off earlier than intended. So questions, comments, anything? I just thank the presenters so much for this information. It's been a great and informative presentation. So thank you very much for all of that.
I think the link was just sent. Celeste sent it.
Good. Thank you very much, Celeste. And if anyone has questions or comments, feel free to just shout them out. I appreciate you all being here today. Make sure you're doing good self-care.
Just one more quick question. This is Jorge. Just like, so what has been the response? Like, have you tried it like with the school population, like parents and all that, your groups, Eric? Or is that mandated only by CPS or stuff like that?
Jorge, we've actually, I believe for a year, we partnered with Head Start and we facilitated groups throughout Head Start locations. And we also had a co-facilitator who was a fatherhood outreach worker with Head Start. So that partnership, it exists. So we have went into the school settings and implemented the fraternity of fathers with a lot of those parents as well. So yeah, so not only in the school settings, but it's also in the community. So.
And as far as age range of fathers, we've had dads who are teens through, dads.
80.
Oh yeah.
80. 80 years
Because
of
we
age.
also qualify dad as a father figure. We don't really care if you're the biological father of the child. If you're providing care in a parental figure for a kid, that counts. And this, we didn't mention, it's for kids under the age of 6. So we're really focusing on that early childhood period. But yeah, we've had dads sort of all across the span.
And I do want to, sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say that there's another program. It's called Hearts and Minds on Babies, which is specifically an early Head Start training program for teachers and professionals to be able to go through and thinking about what is it like to be a preschool teachers. And as part of that program, there are multiple different levels addressing system levels. So there's an administrator program that helps to support administrators of preschools, early Head Start. There's a parenting program that interacts with the teacher program to help parents and teachers have common language across. And then there's the early childhood professionals program. And so in the way that that program is run is that it's for both mom and dad to be able to be there and to be present with it. But with the Hearts and with FOF versus Mom Power, it's more dads are together in one group and moms are together in one group, whereas Hearts and Minds on Babies, they're together.
Yeah,
Raina, sorry, real quick, Lorena, will you throw that in the chat so I can put it as part of the resources when I send out the follow-up email? Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Jorge.
No, yeah, I was gonna say, like I'm interested more into like something to do with the fathers, because I think for the most part, I noticed that probably 80% is like it's mother's involvement into children education, and I don't see a lot of fathers. And then when I see them, the interaction is very minimal. And I feel like, I would like to see if we can start training specifically, for prevention of abuse and neglect. I work for a domestic violence program for Catholic Social Services as a facilitator there too. But what I notice is once, if there's no way to prevent, like, if we can't help the kid avoid abuse, then eventually it's too late, and there's a reason why our programs sometimes are very unsuccessful, because it's to rewire somebody at 40 years old to change their behaviors, is really hard. But a lot of the times they can understand that, hey, you know what, I'll try to do the best for my kid, versus, like, in their own ways. It's really difficult when they are at work, when they are in different contexts than when they are at home, right? And so I'm always thinking, like, maybe more on the preventive part, because of those experiences. I mean, it works for those that are ready, but for a lot of people that are not, like, and especially it's a lot of, like, probably 99% are core mandated because of how deep it goes into personal experiences and all that. Sorry, there's an airplane going by. But I feel like, that for me is like, how sometimes it's too late. That's from my
I think your audio just cut out, Jorge. Yeah, it's still not working.
Nope.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
You're back.
So I was saying, I think, I have observed at least that the intervention part sometimes for some of the men that I work with, I specifically work with men too. That's why I was interested in that. It's sometimes late. The ways of being is like, settle, and they are really hard. Even when they work hard on changing them, they are so used to it, right? So I think, that's why I was asking, like, maybe something that we can prevent. And I'm glad that that exists already. And so definitely I'll be in touch, and I'll talk to Bright Futures about it and see if we can pilot, like a father's, group, maybe. Like, at least I would love to have something like that in my side with at least 2-3 parents, 2-3 fathers. They can actually start seeing how, at least in their home context, they can change things, even if at work or in their social life and all that, not necessarily, but at least that in their homes, they are more thoughtful about how they approach their children and all that.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time talking about why do you do what you do? Because so often, there's an action, and then as a parent, we just have a reaction. And often we don't even think later about, like, was that a good idea? Was my sort of response warranted? Did it even make sense? We talk about discipline in this group a lot. It always comes up. But a dad will say, she hit her sister, so I hit her back and said we don't hit. And so we'll sort of stop and talk about, I want to hear about your thoughts behind, is that effective? Like, did that work for you? What was your intent behind how you were disciplining? Now, what was the impact? Did it work?
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time kind of slowing and stretching out time and looking at, why do you react the way that you react? Or, as soon as someone raises their voice, why are you, like, out of the house? Or what is that really about? And we spend a lot of time going back and looking at, is it actually that you feel like you don't know what you're doing? So you're like, I'm just going to shut it down because I have to control and contain. So we spend 10 weeks kind of like pulling at the threads of why we do what we do and thinking about it. But you're right, behavior is so hard to change. We have been doing this for so long. And as far as we're telling ourselves, it works just fine. So to sit back and say, like, cool, is it? Like, do you think it's working for you?
Yeah.
Or we'll have dads who say, when things start to escalate, I need to go outside and lean against the house and smoke a cigarette. But, my wife comes out and she's at me. So we talked about William, you mentioned self-care and, like, what is that? Like maybe that is self-care for a dad, and he needs a minute, and he needs to communicate, not during a conflict, to his wife or to his partner. When I go outside to smoke, like just give me that minute before I come back, and then we can talk about.
You know, in that sense, like I sometimes feel like it depends on how you go outside, right? If, you know, that's the other part that I'm always careful to tell them, yes, you're gonna take some time, but if you just walk away, it can make things worse. So
Yeah.
you
So how do you communicate what you need
exactly. So
when you're
things
not
like-
in it?
exactly. So things like that are super important. Like I said, you know, like for me, what I notice is like if we could change at least your perception at home, you know, it's like going to the doctor, right? You're not gonna be talking like the same way you talk to your friends and all that. And I feel if we could do that part, at least it would start helping in that preventive, you know, way to not to avoid your kids going through the same things. But I feel like, you know, that's why I was saying it would be awesome to have something like that with, you know, fathers, because I feel like that would be so helpful. And sometimes we focus on wanting to change everything, and I feel we can't. And that's the same with the kids, right? Like I tell them, well, you know, when kids tell me, well, that's what I do at home. I yell all the time. And I said, fine, if you yell all the time and it works at home, I can't tell you anything about home. And when we're here, you know, try not to raise your voice. It's, you know, I'm here, I hear you, your friends hear you. You don't have to do that. And so I feel like a lot of times we don't recognize the context. And I feel like if kids start recognizing that context, then that can help for, you know, a lot of situations where they get into.
You know, you know what, Jorge? You know what, Jorge, real quick. Some of the conversations that I've had with some of our dads, just to like put it real simple to them, just thinking about how kids view us as parents, is just that little boys, you know, just thinking about like how are you going to react. So for little boys, you know, as fathers, we're their first like superhero, and we have them saying like realize that. And for little girls, we're like their first love. So once we realize that, I think a lot of times for the dads, just they don't think about it like that. They just think about it like, hey, you know, I never thought about it in that, you know, I guess in that context, but it's kind of like an aha moment for them. Like, oh wow, like I'm actually like this kid's superhero. Like, yeah. So, you know, it's like just kind of be mindful of that, but also too, just I think, yeah, the some of the things that we discussed in FOF, it probably would be beneficial because we do talk about compromise. Like, what does that look like in a co-parenting situation, even with our spouses and significant others? Like, what are you willing to give up? You know, because like once again, going back to Nicole's point, you know, what's the end goal here? You know, like what is the point be? Like, how do we get there? So like, are you willing to compromise for the betterment of the child's, you know, environment, or is it more about, you know, self, you know, in those moments? So
Well, and Althea put a really good comment in the chat, and she said that's why it's important to bring it back to how our behaviors and interactions impact our children. Put your child's face on it, which makes it personal. So the other piece that we spend a lot of time talking about like dads as men and their background experiences, and then we tie it to those background experiences for your children are being built right now, and you as a father are part of them. So in 20 years, when your kids look back and they say, this is who my dad was, or this was my experience with my father, what do you want that experience to be? Because you have that opportunity to affect that now. You can't change what your past was. We can talk about it, we can process it. You can change what their history will be. And Althea, you are exactly right. You put that little sort of face on it and you give it that context, and dads are like, oh, I don't want them to say, my dad was scary, my dad was mean.
And
so how do you get there?
Sorry, I say that. I'm sorry. I was gonna say, I say that I made that comment because of my own personal lived experience. You know, I met my father when I was in my 30s. And when I asked him, like, why did you like disappear out of my life? He said he got mad at my mother, right? So, I mean, I understand that, but he didn't put my face on that. You know, he got mad at my mother and left me. So when I say that, it's like personalizing it. You know, it's not about your relationship necessarily with this mother. or those contextual relationships, but it's your relationship with your child. And if we always go back to that, hopefully that emotional connection that we have to our children will help us to sort of regulate ourselves and sort of get back and focus on what's the most important thing, and help us to, find productive ways to problem solve through whatever it is we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great theory, because that's almost kind of like breaking those generational curses. Because, I don't know what that looked like for your dad, looking at your grandfather and how he dealt with conflict, and, what examples did he set for him. So that could have, it could have stemmed from there, where it was like, hey, I saw my dad get upset, and that's kind of like how he did. He did the same thing. He kind of, cut and left whenever he was upset. And so, yeah, so definitely that's important.
And so often with parenting, we have that, like, my parents I turned out fine. I'm going to do exactly what my parents did, or I'm going to do everything the exact opposite because my parents are a hot mess and they didn't know what they were doing. So, you get stuck between, I'm going to do the same or I'm going to do the opposite. And most likely what you need is probably something in the middle, but man, the middle is hard to navigate. So something else that we don't do in FOF is we don't tell you what your goal is. We don't say in 10 weeks, you're going to X, Y, and Z. It's not about me. It's not about Eric. It's not about where we want you to be in 10 weeks. It doesn't matter. Where do you want to be in 10 weeks? We're going to help you get there the best that we can in relationship to yourself and your kids.
So does Mom Power do the same then? Do you guys kind of have that same thing for moms? Okay.
Yeah, everyone sets goals in the first or second session as to what they'd like to accomplish. And they're reviewed at the very end as well. It's really non-directive, non-judgmental, the same like trauma-informed framework that is in Mom Power and FOF is across all of the Strong Roots programs. It emphasizes being warm, welcoming, accepting of who you are and where you're coming from in this moment.
And the thing that's also in the background the whole time is the scaffolding in the relationship. So if you weren't someone, like Carly said, who had that hug, Eric and I are going to hug your brains every week for 10 weeks. Like, you can come in mad. You can come in telling us that you hate our program. We're going to accept you for where you're at and acknowledge it and be very real with that. We had a dad who at the end of the 10 weeks, he'd been in foster care. He was a young adult, probably he was 19 or 20. Had spent most of his adolescence in foster care, was aging out, was about to have his second baby. And his reflection at the end of 10 weeks was, never in my life have I had someone genuinely smile and say hello to me every week because they were actually happy to see me. That was a totally novel experience to him. And I have to imagine some of the families that you all work with, it's similar, like just to be welcomed and greeted, even if you're angry, whatever, that we're going to take you how you are, is another huge component for a lot of these dads. Whatever you bring in the room, we're going to hold it.
I just have to say, I have really loved hearing these stories and the program and the success of what's happening, because this is what we need for our parents. I have several conversations I'm having with different parents right now about their struggles, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they should be on today. Like, they should be hearing this stuff. So I'm really excited to be able to share more of the things I've learned, even as a professional in doing this work. I'm really glad that I've got some of these skills under my belt now to share that with them. So I thank you all for this. Any other questions or thoughts or comments before we kind of close out of here today?
Thank you guys for all this, and thank you for sharing. Thank you guys.
Absolutely. And again, go ahead.
Thanks. I was just saying thank you all.
Yeah. And don't forget to sign out if you haven't yet done so, and then look forward to my follow-up email after we're done here today. Thanks, everybody. And don't forget, it's Child Abuse Prevention Month. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Great job, Michelle. Woo!
Thanks, Carly. Have a good one.